I think we are going to begin. We are going to begin in 1 minute because I don't want anyone to wait.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Very clearly, Dr. Solana, very clearly.
Very much. How are you? Great pleasure.
Very nice, very nice.
Pleasure.
Oh, so now it's 4 o'clock.
I cannot hear you.
Can you hear us now, Mr. Solana? Can you hear us now, Mr. Solana?
No. Ah, okay. So speak now.
Okay, can you hear us now, Mr. Solana?
Vamos a ver.
Can you hear? We wait for you, Mr. Solana. Well, I suggest that we begin. We are going to find your Professor Boniface. Okay, I am here. Professor Boniface, I think it's time for us to begin. And first of all, I would like to thank the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies.
Oh, yes. Now, yes. Now, yes.
Together today. Good morning in Europe. Therefore, good morning to our European friends. And of course, good afternoon for the friends who are in China, be it in Beijing or in Shanghai. I want to thank also Iris and Pascal Boniface. Professor Boniface will address our seminar very soon. The Bulgarian Diplomatic Institute have been very helpful, and we are very happy to have Madame Bobeva with us today. It's a great honor. Of course, Ambassador Eugenio Bregolat, without whom Javier Solana would not be with us today. And I would like to thank the SAD Geo Center for his wonderful support. And I would like to thank in advance the Italian ambassador, Mr. Luca Ferrari. So now it's my great pleasure to give the floor to the editor-in-chief of China International Publishing Group, Mr. for the official welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Gosset. 尊敬的普多迪主席索拉纳秘书长
President Prodi, Secretary General Solana, Vice Chairman Quan, President Du Zhanyuan. I'd like to welcome you all to the online seminar on multilateralism and China-US-Europe cooperation, co-sponsored by CIPG, Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies, and the Europe-China Forum. On behalf of the sponsors, I'd like to extend a warm welcome and also our thanks to all the participants. To promote and practice multilateralism is a common choice made by most countries in the world, and it is also a consensus amongst China, the US, and Europe. At the same time, amongst the three actors, each has its own understanding and interpretation of multilateralism. Against this backdrop, we are joined by scholars and experts from China, the US, and Europe at this seminar to discuss multilateralism, as well as what multilateralism means for the new geopolitical and economic landscape. I believe we will come with deeper understandings of this after this seminar. Now, the world economy is yet to recover. Global issues wait to be solved. It is imperative upon us to engage in dialogue. I hope that all parties attending this seminar will be able to focus our discussion on the similarities and the differences of how we see multilateralism, seek common ground while putting aside differences and create opportunities for win-win cooperation. We are committed to practicing multilateralism, promoting global governance, and creating new drivers for joint solution to global issues and for world peace and prosperity. Currently, the world faces a pandemic and unprecedented changes. We are all faced with global issues of complexity. Multilateralism plays a role in diffusing conflicts and upholding world peace because it embodies equal consultation, openness, tolerance, and win-win cooperation. As important actors on the world stage, China, the US, and Europe should take our responsibilities, strengthen exchanges, focus on global governance, and deepen multilateralism. I hope this seminar will be an opportunity for us to focus on the future of the world and share insights and build consensus. Consensus is important for us. Finally, I would like to wish this seminar a complete success. Thank you. A big thank you to Mr. Gao Anming.
We'll start a series of keynote speeches, and we have four remarkable speakers. Mr. Tu Tianyuan, Mr. Quan, Mr. Romano Prodi, and Mr. Javier Solana. It is my great pleasure to give the floor to the President of China International.
Había pasado 2 de ayer también se me fue una. Estas cosas muy abiertas y todo eso. Sí, es necesario volver a entrar. Esta es una.
杜先生。
是吧？尊敬的孔雀副主任，尊敬的
Vice Chairman Quan, former President Prodi, former Secretary General Solana, Mr. Gosset, distinguished participants, friends. It is my great pleasure to join people of vision from around the world online to discuss multilateralism, a topic of great interest and concern around the world. It is an opportunity for us to build consensus and to contribute our insights to raising the level of cooperation amongst China, the US, and Europe. First of all, on behalf of the China International Publishing Group, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants. And I would also like to thank our co-sponsor, Europe-China Forum. We are in a special period where changes of a century are compounded with a pandemic. There are uncertainties and instability in the world. Against this background, it is necessary more than any time in the past for us to practice solidarity and multilateralism. China, the US, and Europe are important forces in the world, and we should take the lead. Multilateralism is embraced by public opinion in the world. Unilateralism is a dead end. Hegemonism and bullying are wrong. In December 2018, the UN General Assembly announced that April 24th is designated International Day of Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace. A few days ago, at the Leaders' Summit on Climate Change, Chinese President Xi Jinping again said that we need to work on the basis of international law, follow the principle of equity and justice, and focus on effective actions. French President Macron, German Chancellor Merkel, and other European leaders also called for multilateralism as a solution to global issues. With the new government in the United States, the US has signaled its return to multilateralism. These constitute a sound policy basis for a dialogue on multilateralism. So I'd like to take this opportunity to share 3 thoughts. First, adherence to multilateralism. And on this, we must step up our dialogue, build more consensus. With a diverse world and economic globalization, an international consensus has emerged that is to improve global governance under a multilateral framework. However, what is real multilateralism? And how to practice it in global governance? We still differ in how to understand this and how to do it. China stands for open and inclusive multilateralism on the prerequisite of sovereignty. And this concept is being embraced and welcomed by countries around the world. People of vision in the world should do more research and have more dialogues on multilateralism, uphold the core principles of multilateralism, and oppose inclusive small circles or selective multilateralism. We must make multilateralism embody the essence of our times and make it serve the well-being of humanity. My second thought is, as we practice multilateralism, major countries must step up coordination and consultation and open up new areas of cooperation. Practice multilateralism is not just empty talk. We have to act. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a global public health crisis and more broadly speaking, a global governance crisis. More and more countries have come to the conclusion that cross-border challenges cannot be taken on by any country alone. China, the US, and Europe are major powers in the world. We must ride the tide of our times and be among the first to act. We must focus on the UN 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development and practice multilateralism in priority areas such as pandemic response, economic development, climate change, and biodiversity. We must try our best to create new opportunities of cooperation as we try to address global governance issues. Within the United Nations, well, the United Nations system was established after learning the lessons and experience from the past. For decades, the United Nations has been playing an important role, and it should continue to play this important role. But at the same time, we must also enlarge the representation and give developing countries a greater say so that there can be a truly multilateral governance structure. My third thought is we need to build a vision for multilateralism. This is where the three actors must learn from each other and form a synergy. Diversity is a feature of human society. There is a set of common values and shared interests for all humanity. These lay the foundation for multilateralism. As the third decade of the 21st century begins, we must build multilateralism that is future-oriented. To do this, we need to respect different countries' history, culture, social system, and the path of development. And on that basis, we must learn from each other, uphold humanity's common values of peace, development, justice, equity, democracy, and liberty. We must demonstrate greater courage. We must demonstrate more wisdom. We must oppose unilateralism and small circles or putting one's own country ahead of other countries. These are against the core values of multilateralism. We must take up our responsibility to protect the interests of vulnerable and smaller countries and provide solutions to challenges. And we should work for a new roadmap toward a better future. China supports and practices multilateralism. China's concept of multilateralism aims at building a community of shared future and a new type of international relations. We move in the direction of promoting a multipolar world and a democracy in international relations. We work to uphold the Charter of the United Nations.
In practice, China is a staunch supporter of the UN systems with vigorous participation in sustainability, peacekeeping, climate change, and other UN initiatives and activities. And we have played an active part in putting together a new type of multilateral platforms. We have initiated Belt and Road Initiative. We have shouldered our global responsibilities to confront global challenges. We have joined COVAX and the G20 Debt Relief Initiative. We have come up with carbon peaking and carbon neutrality targets, amongst other initiatives. So with solid and groundbreaking actions, we are practicing multilateralism, its theories and values alike. Dear participants, friends, think tanks, scholars, and experts are important elements to push for the awareness of multilateralism. So with broader care for mankind, let's study the implications of multilateralism so as to come up with more new ideas and solutions to promote multilateral cooperation and communication between different countries. CIPG will leverage this roundtable as a new opportunity to fully leverage our advantages of international communication while further supporting closer cooperation and collaboration between ACCWS and think tanks and researchers of other countries so as to put together platforms of multilateral studies and exchanges. And the research findings will be shared in a timely way so as to contribute to the sustained development of multilateralism and the building of a community with shared destiny for mankind. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, President Tu.
Pleasure for me.
Introduce the next keynote speaker, the Deputy Director of the Committee of Foreign Affairs of the CPPCC, Director Quan, and I would like to thank you as a French citizen for all the wonderful work you did to deepen the relations between France and China, Europe and China. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
谢谢主持人。
Thank you, Mr. Gosset. It's my great pleasure to participate in this roundtable, and I want to send my warmest regards to all my old friends in my different capacities. On many occasions, I talked to Mr. Romano Prodi, Javier Solana, Ambassador Bricolat, Mr. Boniface, and Mr. Chen Dongxiao. I'd like to thank all of you for your efforts and contribution to promoting mutual understanding, trust, and cooperation between us, China and Europe. Talking about the international order and what's next, there is heated and intense discussion ongoing. And I agree with President Du Zhanyuan and Mr. Gao Anming. Thanks to your participation, our suggestions and analysis will be indeed constructive and practical as well. Let's revisit the theme of our conference today. Indeed, after 4 years of multilateralism being trampled by that superpower, now it appears that multilateralism has become a brand new Christmas tree equipped with all kinds of labels and decorations. It is obvious that it is all the more important at present than ever for us to clarify what is real multilateralism. What is a kind of multilateralism that will contribute to global peace, stability, and development? What are the key tenets of such unilateralism? According to President Du, on the 22nd of April, there was the climate summit. That was a very important multilateral summit. And that date helped us recall that 5 years ago, 175 countries signed the Paris Agreement. The dynamism of the Paris Agreement has demonstrated how different countries had overcome their differences to pursue the fundamental interest of the entire mankind with a future orientation. As we know, diversity with differences, seeking common ground while sharing differences is a key tenet of ancient Chinese philosophy. As long as we adhere to peace, development, justice, fairness, democracy, freedom, and other human values while transcending differences and over ideology, systems of government, culture, and history, and through equal-footed consultations and friendly cooperation, will we be able to maintain world peace while building an open global economy. In this way, we'll push mankind forward hand in hand. That's what I believe, what is a genuine multilateralism. It should be open and inclusive to start with. Second, genuine multilateralism, of course, should be based on international law. As President Du Zhanyuan has pointed out, which I fully endorse, the global system with UN at the core and the global order with international law as the foundation are a guarantee for peace. They must be safeguarded in a staunch way. UN, WTO, WHO, and other multilateral bodies should respond to the cause of our times based on the broadest consensus of consultations from all countries. They must reform and optimize themselves in order to maintain their authority and effectiveness so as to achieve the human interest of peace and development, which is its original intention. Third, genuine multilateralism must feature respect for independence, sovereignty, and non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. Those are the basic principles of international relations enshrined in the UN Charter. We have 190 plus countries in the world. They are all equal members of a diversified world, and they have legitimate rights to explore their own road to development according to their own experience. In many regions in the world, we have a lot of chaos and disorder as a result of interventions by other countries. Let me give you I can give you a lot of examples, such as Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, amongst other countries, with ongoing turmoil and sufferings for their people. Those lessons are profound and bloodstained. Talking about the theme of today on the multilateralism, what about the prospects of a cooperation involving China, EU, and the US? I'm looking forward to your insights and analysis. On my personal note, I'm ready to share with you 4 observations. First, the current US administration has emphasized intention to say goodbye to the disruptive foreign policy pursued by the previous administration. That's good. For China and EU, who are consistent supporters of multilateralism, we have expressed our welcome. But all the more importantly, we are expecting the policy statement of return to international stage should be demonstrated by respect for UN Charter and other international law and systems with concrete actions. Second, China and EU have always been partners in maintaining multilateralism. Back in 1975, when I was an intern diplomat at a very young age in Brussels, I witnessed the signing of a diplomatic relationship between European community and China. It is the 46th anniversary for the founding of a diplomatic relationship. Over the past 45 years, I'm so gratified by the ongoing willing cooperation between the two sides. Our cooperation has added to the well-being of both peoples. Moreover, it has contributed to global prosperity, progress, and development. The COVID-19 pandemic has dealt a severe blow to the world. However, in 2020, China-EU trade bucked the trend to have increased by 5.3%. Now China is the biggest trading partner of EU. We concluded our CAI negotiation on schedule. All that has fully demonstrated our mutual interdependence and cooperation and resilience and potentials in such cooperation. I have to point out, notwithstanding a list of achievements and ambitious goals, our achievements are being disrupted and interrupted from time to time. In 2019, EU issued a strategic outlook document dividing our relationship into partnership, competitor, and systemic rivalry. I said to my EU friends that this seemingly accurate taxonomy is ungrounded and untenable. Talking about institutional rivalry or systemic rivalry, and there are different interpretations of the same expression, this kind of a positioning is a dismissal of the strategic implication of our diplomatic relationship. In particular, it is a dismissal of our original intention to seek common ground while sharing differences and pushing for a multipolar world. For about a dozen times, I directly participated in the drafting of important documents between China and the EU. With Mr. Prodi, Mr. Javier Solana, and Ambassador Picolat, I clearly remember we worked together to make sure that every policy document can not only address our imminent concerns, but also, more importantly, lay a new foundation for our mutually beneficial cooperation with fresh energy and fresh prospects. We never intended to create trouble or aggravate difference, let alone stepping on the brake or even backtracking. However, unfortunately, my pessimistic worries were proven. Let's take a look at the positioning of systemic rivalry, politically, diplomatically, economically, scientifically, and in people-to-people exchanges. A host of measures and actions have been taken, especially those based on lies and misinformation about Xinjiang, resulting in some sanctions against China. Those measures have disrupted and damaged the foundation of our mutual trust and cooperation, leveraging the roundtable as an opportunity today and as a veteran diplomat for over 3 decades in China-EU relations. I want to make the appeal that our relationship must return to its original foundation as soon as possible. Our cooperation far outweighs our competition, and our common ground far outnumbers our differences. We must make our relationship more independent and resilient. By expanding common interests, we shall shrink differences. We should focus on cooperation. We should stay away from self-inflicted setbacks so as to ruin all the achievements that have been hard-earned. In this way, our progress and development could be further pushed forward together with the reform and optimization of international systems. Thirdly, talking about our relationship with the US, yes, we have expectations, but our expectation must be reciprocated. We have had multiple rounds of discussions and encounters with the new administration. We are adhering to a non-conflict, non-confrontational policy with the US with mutual respect and win-win cooperation while safeguarding our sovereignty, security, and development interests. If US wants to have dialogue and cooperation, we welcome it. And we need to adhere to mutual respect and equality. When the US talks about competition, we're not afraid of a competition on level playing field.
But if the United States is bent on bashing China and confronting China, which actually happened quite a few times in the past century of the Communist Party of China, we were never afraid, and each time we were able to realize our own development despite the isolation and embargoes. Fourth, I believe China, Europe, and the United States should and must contribute to world peace and development. As major players in the world, the three actors shoulder important responsibilities in upholding world peace and promoting global development. On important issues like climate change, green development, and the Iranian nuclear issue, we share broad common interest and should cooperate. There are many areas where we should and could cooperate, and our cooperation can lead to great results. What is also noteworthy, I believe, is that whether it is China-Europe ties, China-US ties, or Europe-US ties, they are both independent and interdependent. I believe each should develop relations with both of the remaining two, openness and cooperation and positive interactions should what we should do. One must not pit one against another or target or harm a third party. That is not what a major country is expected to do, and it would boomerang. We as major countries must respect each other, seek common ground, put aside differences, and go for win-win cooperation. We must adhere to real multilateralism, and we should try to solve problems rather than create problems. We should join hands in tackling global challenges and make our due contribution to world peace and stability. Again, I'd like to thank the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies and the Europe-China Forum for sponsoring this important seminar at this juncture, so that we friends from China, Europe, and the United States can discuss online this important issue for better understanding.
Now with you, otherwise the
interpreters are going to be confused. I stick to English, and thank you for the richness and of your remarks, of your keynote speech. Now we are going to listen to the remarks of Mr. Romano Prodi. Of course, Mr. Prodi wanted to be with us, but he had to make a change in his agenda, so he recorded for us a short video that we are going to watch together now.
Very happy and honored to take part of this seminar concerning multilateralism among US, Europe, and China. In this very difficult time, you know, I don't see any more difficult situation than now. You know, the tension concerning Xinjiang, concerning Hong Kong, concerning trade, and in the last part also strong political confrontations. So there are tensions in any field between China and the United States, and Europe is in the middle. Even if we are so interested to have good relations on both sides, clearly we are part of the NATO, but symbolically, last year was the year in which Europe traded as much with the United States and China. And so this also has been the reason why in the period of time, in the end of the last year, in the period of time between Trump and Biden, was signed the project of agreement, the prospect of agreement on investment between China and Europe, and this could have been a great opportunity, but the tensions that we had, between the increasing of the tension that we had meanwhile, make now the necessary approval of the European Parliament very, very difficult, at least at the political situation of today. Very, very difficult unless we have a change in our relations, some new event that is not so easy to implement. So in the meanwhile, we must find, let us put it in a very simple manner, we must buy time. We must buy time because I don't think that the tension will go on for a long period of time, but we have to use this time, let's say, improving, putting on the table the goals of the agreement and try to discuss this problem and to smooth the tensions that we have accumulated in the period of time. Also, I think that we could discuss what is agreed among us, between us and the agenda. Let's say, let us think to the environmental problems. This is such a big field that can be an instrument of improving our relations and making a progress that is now difficult, so possible. And there is another field of cooperation in order to have the future possible. And this is the interpretation of the Silk Road. We have approved it and accepted with a great improvement on the relation between China and Europe. But then this has been only a Chinese event, a Chinese political, let's say, directed only by the Chinese side. And this is more natural when you have needs of cooperation close to China, where your knowledge is so important, but because China-Europe relation in the Silk Road, this was the aim was also to improve the China-Europe relations. Of course, when there are decisions close to Europe, and this cooperation is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, the result will be negative for both sides. In my last reflection is why the Silk Road is not an occasion of a necessary cooperation between Europe and China in Africa. You have problems. China has problems in Africa. We have problems in Africa. Well, I am dreaming now, but why not to be together 20 hospitals in Ethiopia, or to do an area of development in Ethiopia or Eritrea or in some other country. You know, we must move the standstill that we have now. Realistically, this is the only way out that we have in such a difficult situation. To improve our relation and to have a long-term vision that world peace needs this change, and we have to work for the future of the world.
So, of course, it was Mr. Romano Prodi, and I hope that Mr. Javier Solana is still with us. I cannot see Dr. Solana anymore on the screen. Our colleagues will try to reconnect with Dr. Javier Solana, also Ambassador Eugenio Bregolat disappeared the screen. Well, it happens when we are having meetings on Zoom, but I can see that things are moving in Madrid, and I think that Mr. Solana is back. When Mr. Solana is back, we will give him the floor, of course, because we would like to finish this series of keynote speeches started by Mr. Du. Yes, Mr. Solana is back, also with Mr. Bregolat. Mr. Solana, thank you so much for waiting, and thank you so much for presenting this very important event. It has been said by all the speakers, we are at a very important moment. Please, dear Dr. Solana, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is the sound okay? Can you hear me well?
Perfect, 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 perfect.
Okay, it's a great pleasure to meet you with friends from China, with some of you I have met before. I would like to thank to David, also the organization of the meeting. And I would like to make a couple of remarks about the relationship between China, the United States, and the European Union. I think, and it's my hope, that this triangular relationship should be a fundamental institution or a fundamental relationship to maintain the world or the today, a multipolar world, a difficult world, and to recuperate the values of multilateralism, which I would like to transmit to you is the wish that the Europeans, at least many of the Europeans we have, in trying to recuperate a strategic trust in the relation between the European Union and China, and if possible also to recuperate a strategic trust between the United States and China. I think that is absolutely fundamental, and if we want to continue maintaining a world of peace, cooperation, and a world in which multilateralism will concentrate on 2 or 3 issues which I think is almost ready to begin to give a push in the right direction. The first one I would like to say is to mention is a question related to climate change. The meeting that took place in the United States a few years ago, I think it was a very important first step. We're going to have another summit on climate change later in the year. Now, if we were able, these 3 groups of countries, China, the European Union, and the United States, to get a good agreement by the summit that will take place in November, I think that an important step will be taken in the construction of what we call the multilateral world. If we are able to get an agreement on climate change, that would be fundamental, not only to solve the problem, but to create or recreate a climate of change, of trust, and of cooperation among the different parts of this big family of countries. Now, this is very, very important, and I would like very much to get a commitment from this conversation we are having today to do the utmost in that summit that will take place later on in the year. Another thing which is very, very important is the cooperation on technological matters. I mean, we have problems in several questions related to technology. We have problems at this point in time in the world and about semiconductors. All that has to be recuperated with a sense that it's common goods in a manner in order to have the possibility of having the fantastic changes going to take place in artificial intelligence. To this, to having a sensible notion of it in IA, it will be really very, very fundamental to have a solid relationship between the European Union, China, and the United States. I think that it will be also very important, and we have the possibility of facing it soon, is the reform of the WTO. The WTO is a fundamental organization for global governance. I think that the WTO, if we don't take care of the WTO in a constructive manner, the WTO may go to be an irrelevant organization. That could not be afforded by us. We have to really get together from the beginning, from today, if possible, of the 3 groups, the United States, China, and the European Union, to get the reforms necessary on the WTO. And we know what type of reforms have to be done. But I think we have, with the new Director General, which is a very active person, see if we can really tackle the reform which are necessary in the WTO. I think it's not impossible. I think it will be possible to do it. Yesterday, we were having a debate like this one with Pascal Lamy and Professor Liu Fu from the University of Beijing, in which we really tackled some ideas of how to move forward in that direction that I think that produce a sentiment of hope that this is going to be possible. I think that if we are able to get this sentiment of moving on the trade issues, I think the relationship will be, or the climate will be much better to continue fighting the big problems that we have today. The same thing has to be the cooperation among the three big powers, the European Union, China, and then the United States, on the matter of vaccines. We are seeing now, for instance, when we look to India, the catastrophe that is taking place in India, and the catastrophe is going to have consequences because India, as you know, is a very important producer of vaccines. So how do we handle the possibility with the vaccines to cover the vaccination, not only of country A and country B or the big countries, but also the countries which are in a situation much more difficult to get vaccines. An effort also by the World Organization of Health, and a good impetus also by us, Americans, Europeans, and Chinese, will be a very good, very important step in the right direction, and a good example also to the rest of the world. I think that one of the things that I would like to forbid from our thinking is the possibility of a decoupling of our economy. I know there are people that are thinking that decoupling of the Americans and the Chinese, and the Americans and the Europeans from the Chinese is a solution. I think this is if the system to govern the world today with the level of problems that we have, but they're still working together. Imagine what would happen if we were a sentiment that our economies are decoupling. At the end of the day, all the problems that we have to solve will be much more difficult if the economies of these countries are getting to be decoupled. So please do not allow for a decoupling of our economies as an objective. This is a mistake, and a mistake that will pay altogether very, very, very expensive. So I am not a naive politician, but I like to be a politician with hope. And I think that we have still the possibility of recuperating the world that creates in belief in multilateralism, inclusive multilateralism, as has been said before. I think that inclusive is a very important word. So to sum up, I believe we are moving towards a multipolar, a multilateral world, long gone in the historical moment when one superpower could unilaterally impose a certain set of rules on the global vision. Now is a different situation, and we have to adapt to the new situation with a confidence, with trust, a strategic trust between China and the United States, China and the European Union. The three of us would be able to return this world to a path of multilateralism, which is the only manner of governing a world that is complex, as difficult as the one we are doing today. So I want to thank you very much for organizing this conference. Sometimes this distant conference through the internet are not as close or warm as the ones we want to have, but I'm looking forward to having a real talk, not only through the internet, in which we could really get really back to the sentiment that is necessary, this cooperation between the three most important actors in the world of today. So thank you very much for those who have contributed to this conference, and I wish that the debates that will take place in the later hours of the day will be constructive, and at the end of the day, we will have a moment of light in which we will see without closing our eyes, looking at the world difficult, but in which we need very urgently the cooperation between the three of us. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you soon personally, and looking forward to a world in which multilateralism will be back, and it will be back in an inclusive manner. Thank you very much, my friends.
Thank you very much, Dr. Solana. Certainly not naive, a politician with hope, and a wise thinker, very wise thinker. Thank you for your 4 points: climate change, technology, WTO, the vaccines, actions could be taken now. And I would like to inform you, Dr. Solana, that with the friends of the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies, at the end of June, we will organize a conversation around the topic technology in global affairs, technology in international relations, because your point on AI is very important. And what comes next with the applications of quantum physics is also very significant. So thank you so much, Dr. Solana, and thank you also for the support of your Geo Center at ESADE in Madrid. This is the end of this series of keynote speeches. Thank you very much to President Tu Chenyuan, to Director Quan, of course, to Mr. Romano Prodi. He will be informed on the results of this meeting, and to Dr. Javier Solana. Now I have the great pleasure to introduce the first panel discussion. We will look at the new geopolitical landscape among the China, Europe, and the United States of America. Wonderful panelists, 5 panelists: Mr. Hu Chenyue, Mr. Luca Ferrari, Mr. Chen Dongxiam, Professor Pascal Boniface, and General Giuseppe Cucchi. And first, this is my great pleasure to give the floor to the Vice President of China Public Diplomacy Association, former Assistant Foreign Minister, Mr. Hu Chenyue. 非常感谢胡部长。
Thank you, Mr. Hu. Thank you, Mr. Gosset. Good afternoon to you all. Let me share with you 5 observations. First, the COVID-19 pandemic has dealt a serious blow to all countries internally and externally, resulting in profound impact on the global structure. The global economy is in recession, and economic globalization is confronted with headwinds. Unilateralism and protectionism are resurging, and in the global governance systems are confronted with fresh challenges. China, US, and the EU are key actors on the world stage. Seen from the mega trend, the basic characteristics of all 3 stay unchanged. The United States is the strongest developed country, while China remains the largest developing country, and Europe is an indispensable and independent pole in today's world. Under new circumstances, some changes have emerged in this triangular relationship. Between China and the US, there's greater complexity with rising competition. And President Xi Jinping and President Biden had a conversation on the phone call on the eve of Chinese New Year. They reached consensus to point to the direction for China-US relationship to be brought to the right track. In China-EU relationship, mutual beneficial cooperation remains the mainstream. I'm full of confidence in that. However, there are some disruptions as well. Most importantly, we should stick to the strategic considerations of the overall consideration and the tone of our relationship, so as to stay away from interruptions while adhering to mutual trust. Between US and EU, under overall cooperation, there are different kinds of differences, and that's only normal for us to have. Second, there is no future for new Cold War. The focus of the Biden administration is on how to resolve domestic social issues and push for economic recovery. It has proposed $2 trillion budget programs. And the United States is used to showing its muscles to the outside world, and they will keep doing the same. However, I don't think they are in the position to launch an all-out new Cold War. It's not going to be recognized or agreed by the international community. Everybody wants to have stability. If you want to impose new Cold War on the entire world, it will go nowhere. And the overall development strategy in China is the ongoing modernization, so as to enable 1.4 billion people to improve their living standards. And China has come up with 2 centennial objectives while implementing new development concept and strategy, which bears ample evidence to what we want to achieve. We have no interest in the so-called new Cold War, and we will not be taken to one led by others. And Asian countries do not want to choose sides either. Europe has its own strategic choice. Starting a new Cold War is only harmful against Europe. The Cold War in the last century had most countries as victims. The tragedy of the history should not be repeated. The pressing need for the EU is to break away from the shadow of a COVID-19 pandemic while achieving resumption of productivity and improvement of geopolitical climate. Although Europe is much better off than other regions in the world, long-standing self-inflicted setbacks will also deplete its wealth. I hope Europe will make the wise choice. I'm confident in that.
所谓的新疆问题和香港问题，完全是中国的内政，外界无权干涉。
Turning to the issues of Xinjiang and Hong Kong, they are entirely China's internal affairs and brooks no intervention from either the United States or Europe. Third, economic decoupling won't work. When we look at the world's economic map, we are all interconnected. No one can live without others. Multilateralism is the call of our times. It allows for complementarity and shared prosperity. To strengthen regional or sub-regional cooperation remains a policy priority for most countries. China and Europe have a good foundation for cooperation, and the areas of our cooperation are broad and with great potential. We should make the most of it. In 2020, China-US trade grew contrary to people's expectation. 15 Asia-Pacific countries signed RCEP. China and Europe completed negotiation of CAI. China's Belt and Road Initiative made steady headway. All these show that we should ride the tide of our times and cooperate in the interest of all parties. Convergence of our interests is the biggest geopolitics. It is also the direction of win-win cooperation. My fourth point is to have an ideological argument is pointless. One unfortunate feature of this new era is there are still people in the world who want to repeat the past mistakes of making an issue out of ideology. This is both irrational and a dead end. It cannot solve any issue. It only increases mistrust and hatred. Humanity is a whole. We must not divide countries into different classes. I believe we are facing enough challenges. China, Europe, and the United States are major powers in the world. There's no reason for us to create hostility to consume our strength and add to the instability in the world. My fifth point is, I believe there is space of cooperation for China, the US, and Europe. And probably we should focus on the following. First, we should work together to fight and win the battle against the pandemic. This is the top priority for all humanity. Our three sides must step up cooperation and coordination. Mr. Solana also spoke of it, and I very much agree. We must engage in necessary cooperation. When the three forces work together, we can set a good example. Currently, vaccine holds the key to our victory. And the vaccine should become a global public good. And in terms of the distribution of vaccines, less developed countries and the regions should be treated more favorably, because this is the fundamental interest of all of us. And this is the earnest hope of countries, the third world countries. Well, second, we must reopen the economy as early as possible, but also in a reasonable way. The world economy still faces the risk of a recession. We must be open, we must be cooperative. We should promote trade and investment, liberalization and facilitation, work for an open world economy, an economy that puts the shadow of a crisis behind it. This pandemic can also be turned into an opportunity. I believe for Europe, a more positive and active attitude is advisable so that Europe can work with China and the rest of the world and be successful. Third, we should implement the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Our three actors must work with other countries in the world to realize the 17 SDGs. Fourth, I also agree that climate change is an important area where we must engage in long-term, sustained and broad-ranging cooperation. This is an important issue for this century. It has everything to do with the future of humanity. So when confronted with climate change, we have a shared destiny. China, the United States, and Europe should all honor our commitments and implement the Paris Agreement and be an exemplary role for the world. Thank you.
Now, because you know, of course, time is flying very fast, I would like to introduce the next speaker, and it's really a great honor to have Ambassador Luca Ferrari with us. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your support. And we know that this is a very important year for Italy for many reasons, but the G20 matters tremendously. You're going to speak about that. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Grazie mille.
Thank you, David. Thank you to all the other speakers for their extremely interesting introductions. It would be hard to deny that China-US-Europe cooperation has become more complex over the past 2 years. It has not happened overnight. The multifaceted nature of the EU-China relation has been recognized already since March 2019, when the European Commission and the EU High Representative issued a joint communication titled EU-China, a Strategic Outlook. According to this document, Europe and China can be at the same time partners in areas of common interest, competitors on certain economic issues, and rivals regarding governance, systems, and values. Rivals does not mean at all enemies. It means Europe and China support and promote different governance models. The Biden administration has recently suggested a similar approach. Secretary Blinken defined US relations with China a competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. Most people in the Western world would agree that China can be at the same time a partner, a competitor, and in some case, a rival. Of course, there are divergences about the proportions we should give to the three components. So far, Europe has seen China mostly as a partner, and I believe most European countries are still ready to engage and cooperate. But at the same time, divergences on systemic issues have recently become more visible, and I do not think that they will go away any soon. Nevertheless, I'm convinced that we can do a lot to make sure that partnership continues to prevail over rivalry. First and foremost, on global issues, the participation of President Xi Jinping in the climate summit at the invitation of President Biden and Senator Kerry's recent visit to Shanghai have confirmed that common priorities such as climate change can represent a common ground for fruitful engagement and cooperation among Europe, US, and China, notwithstanding frictions on other topics. The return of Washington to multilateral tables will offer important opportunities to resume work together. Climate, global health, and economic and trade policies could be the field of mutual discussion. Let's not forget, though, regional crises such as Myanmar and issues such as the nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, the nuclear deal with Iran, the Afghan peace process, stability and security in Africa and the Middle East. The EU, China, and the US share common goals and interests in these contexts. Europe is ready and willing to engage with China on global and regional topics. In addition, of course, trade and economic exchanges will continue to represent a major convergence of interests. Trade between most Western countries and China has been increasing, not decreasing. The pandemic crisis has notwithstanding. China is the second largest economy enjoying a promising recovery. Its opening up, as confirmed by President Xi at the Boao Forum, will provide growing opportunities for mutually beneficial economic exchanges. The G20 under the Italian presidency can represent a relevant common platform and laboratory to foster cooperation between Europe, the USA, and China in the post-COVID phase. The successful engagement at the finance ministerial meeting is very meaningful to this regard. We look forward to working together with China in the framework of the G20 and other multilateral fora, and of course, to continuing our fruitful bilateral cooperation. We must never forget that in the next decade, China will represent by itself 1/3 of global growth. Another third will go to the OCDE area, and the final third to the rest of the world, Brazil and India included. It is, to my knowledge, impossible to ignore or decouple from China and Asia for that matter. On the contrary, I believe it's time to work with China to jumpstart globalization, to create a rules-based system, to review the rules that govern the WTO and world trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your very stimulating remarks. And thank you also, Mr. Ambassador, for all the work you do for the relationship between Italy and China and the European Union and China. Thank you so much. And we wish you a very, very successful meeting. Now, it's also a great pleasure for me to introduce the next speaker, probably in Shanghai, the president of Shanghai Institute for International Studies, a remarkable scholar, Mr. Chen Dongxia. Professor, Dr. Chen, the floor is yours.
谢谢高大伟教授。
Thank you, Mr. Gosset. And I would like to thank the sponsors for having invited me. I'd like to share 3 thoughts. First, when we look at the current global geopolitical landscape, especially when we look at relations between China, the US, and Europe, we're most concerned about the possibility of a world splitting apart and a new Cold War. We are unnerved by a lot of developments. For instance, the Biden government defines its relations with China in a pretty negative way. China is called the most serious competitor, and there are 3 aspects to this relationship: competition, cooperation, and rivalry. But in the real foreign policy, actually rivalry and competition take precedence over cooperation. This is too negative a view of this relationship. Second, the United States still harbors misunderstandings about China. The US government and many opinion leaders in the United States often label China. For instance, they accuse China of being authoritarian, mercantilist in economics, and being nationalist on many issues. This way of seeing China shows ignorance of China's modernization, the progress China has made, the rising well-being of the Chinese people. It shows ignorance of the impact of China's modernization on the world and China's contribution to world prosperity. So these labels assigned to China by the US are misleading, and they actually poison the atmosphere. Third, well, in terms of issues concerning Xinjiang and Hong Kong, the United States continues to threaten China's core national interests. It continues to impose sanctions on China and creates small circles excluding China. So in my view, it is true that Biden government's policy is different from Trump's.
In general, at present, the overall framework of China policy has not got rid of the shadow of the previous administration without finding the right path of dealing with China. This is a key reason for instability and further worsening of global geopolitical landscape. My second observation is that for 3 of us, China, US, and EU, we must work together, meeting the expectation of the international community. We need to work together with the international community to rebuild a global agenda for cooperation so as to jointly confront global challenges while providing more public goods for the global community. First, all 3 of us must work with each other to push for an inclusive development agenda for the world. Imbalances and lack of development in today's world is one of the key root causes for divisions and confrontation in the world. We should not only establish and open a global economy while improving a global governance system, or more importantly, we must make sure that all peoples could partake in the wealth of development with common prosperity. Now, our number 1 task is to reject vaccine nationalism. At the same time, within the framework of G20, we must push forward a systematic debt relief program with participation from all stakeholders so as to provide economic help to developing economies under the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The global community should work together to confront global challenges. Third, all 3 of us must work together to save the fragile ecosystem of the planet. Now, save the global planetary ecosystem is an important foundation to achieve global recovery. According to the latest climate summit, key economies such as China, US, and the EU have had their leaders commit to prompt actions to step up carbon emission reduction with technology innovation so as to achieve green and sustainable development. And the international community is pinning their hopes on us. Third, all 3 of us must help implement the principle of technology for good. Now, the international community is concerned with technology ethics, data security, digital divide, and other challenges created by emerging and new technologies. Governments, research entities, and startup tech companies and the tech companies of all three of us must work together to make sure that tech innovation contributes to a better future for mankind, with comprehensive development of mankind empowered. My last point is that whether our cooperation will fare far enough in a stable way, it hinges on the implementation of inclusive multilateralism. Many other scholars have pointed out the importance of inclusive multilateralism. We must fight against all menaces to inclusive multilateralism. There are three types of threat to inclusive multilateralism. First, it is from unilateralism. Unilateralists would say, my country is first, or it's all about my country, without regard to international public interest and multilateral agreements. They only observe their domestic interest. They will exit from international agreements. They will impose sanctions on other countries in a willful way. And the Trump administration observed the typical unilateralism. And the second type of menace is what I call seeking external cure to one's own problem. So with domestic, economic, political, and social difficulties, the administrations or the governments do not use reforms to resolve those problems. Rather, they are creating an enemy from the outside world by exaggerating external threats so as to worsen strategic mistrust with other countries, damaging the foundation for global cooperation. The third threat is that of small block politics, what we call small block politics. It is either based on value-based diplomacy, clash of civilizations, or military alliance targeting third parties. They are exclusive by nature. It seems to be a kind of multilateralism in quotes. However, they have deviated from equally footed, open, and collaborative multilateralism. They have run counter to multilateralist principles of maintaining global peace, development, and mutually beneficial cooperation. In a nutshell, for China, US, and the EU, we should always adhere to the principles for consultation and sharing and genuine multilateralism. Only in this way we will push for global governance system to develop towards a more equitable and reasonable direction, so as to steer the world away from divisions and new Cold War. Thank you very much for your presentation.
The new tech as a factor that we need to look at in the international relations, and I do hope, Professor, that you will join the conversation at the end of June around this very important topic. We were in Shanghai, and now we are going to go to Paris, and I would like to supporting this event. From the very beginning, your reaction was very, very positive, and your think tank, IRIS, is a very important platform for all of us to exchange and to build a world of progress. So the floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you, David. Thank you and congratulations, because you are doing a wonderful job. And it's a very important issue at a very important moment, because there's an important change of international policy in US. And of course, there is a big impact both on China and on EU. And I'm very also happy to see very good friends from China or from Spain. I will say first that the main international objectives, the main international strategic matters is a growing rivalry between China and US. And this rivalry is rising. It was not a personal rivalry between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. It's national and structural between China and USA. And in fact, we could see that Trump's opposition to China was the only aspect of its internal policy which has been approved by a Democrat. And Biden has changed US policy regarding climate, regarding Middle East, regarding Europe, but not on China. The fact to present China as the main strategic threat for US is a continuity from Trump to Biden. And there is two aspects which will not change. First, China wants to become the #1 power in the world. It's an official goal of President Xi Jinping and of the Communist Party. And US does not accept to give up to its worldwide leadership. So there is a problem. There is a problem because the one wants to continue to grow and the other does not accept to be overpassed by the second one. When we look at the facts, and facts are important matter. In 2001, China GDP was represented 10% of US GDP. In 2019, China GDP represents 65% of US GDP. And after the COVID-19, I think that the figure are now 17% of US GDP. So the question now is not if China will overpass US. The only question is to guess when it will happen. And of course, it's a very important challenge for US because the US is used to be worldwide power #1 since 1945. That means that for every American citizen, which is under 90 years old, it is used to live in the #1 country during his life, because you begin to be interested by international politics at 15, let's say. So every American who is under 90 is used and to live in the #1 country. And plus the fact that for US citizens, due to historical roots, due to manifest destiny, to the city shining on the hill, it's normal to be #1 because US tend to believe that their values are universal and not only American. So, of course, to be overpassed by China is a pill hard to swallow. And there is a willingness to create an anti-Chinese coalition, to create a kind of NATO, ASEAN NATO. The Quad with India, Japan, and Australia is on this kind of things. And there is, of course, Biden is very nicer than Trump. It's not very difficult by the fact that Biden wants to mend the relationship with European allies. But the risk is to embark them in an anti-Chinese coalition. And the EU position must be different. Because, of course, there is a willingness in US, in Washington, to create a new divide between democracies and so-called authoritarian regimes, and pushing Russia in the arms of China and presenting this new coalition as a threat for the democracies. But there is a part of self-fulfilling prophecy in this strategy. Of course, as a French, as a European, we have differences on the position with China on Xinjiang, on Hong Kong. It's not only internal matters, it's also international matters, because the way China is dealing, it's a national matters, but there is also a view on the way it's dealt by Chinese authorities. And we have also differences on political systems, but we have also fields of cooperation. We have the same interest to fight against climate change. We have the same interest to fight for international security, Korean Peninsula, Myanmar, and so on in Africa. We have the same interest to develop Africa, because Africa in the self-interest of Europe and of China, and we could work together on this field. And we have, of course, the same interest to struggle against pandemics and to recover from COVID-19. Europe must set its own interest and not to follow blindly US policy. European problem and goal is not world supremacy. It's not our goal. It's US goal maybe, but it's not European goal. So our goal as European, it's world prosperity and world international security. And we must work with China on some issue, with US on other ones, but we not be resumed as a lieutenant of US general in this global competition. Europe should be a bridge, and US must accept a bridge between US and China. US must accept to be eventually number 2 power in the world. They don't have to fear to implode as USSR has done 30 years ago. And China must avoid hubris and stick to a real multilateralism and to accept discussion on some hard issue. If China must make some effort, if US accept the change, because they could not prevent China to become number 1 country, and the job of European job is to be a bridge between China and US to have a real multilateralism, which is in the self-interest of the free actors. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for these very subtle remarks, and you touch upon security.
Professor,
former general, retired Italian general, Giuseppe Cucchi, who was military advisor of President Romano Prodi. Unfortunately, Giuseppe Cucchi had to enter hospital yesterday. He will undergo, actually is undergoing an operation while we speak now, but he could send us his remarks in time. He has asked me on his behalf to read his remarks. So it is why, while you see General Cucchi's picture, the voice you are going to listen is my voice, but General Cucchi, I only represent myself. So we play Cucchi's speech as read by myself.
I would like to begin by extending my thanks to the organizers for the opportunity of being here today to present my ideas on today's topic to such a qualified and knowledgeable audience. Allow me a few moments to clarify that although you will see my name in the program next to the title General, I am in fact a retired general. As such, I am in the privileged condition of being able to express only my personal ideas which in no way express the position of the Italian state, which I have had the honor of serving for most of my life. The success of the hybrid war concept resulted in a substantial and progressive increase in the number of sectors that need to be included in the definition of security. A definition that, in this broader sense, is as much the basis as the result of good relations between peoples and nations. I would like to confess that I, too, am guilty of using the term security in two of its possible interpretations, real security and perceived security, which is also influenced by the psychological and political climate, as well as by the different stimuli coming from the new and traditional media. It is, however, important to understand that when the two are significantly different, the security actors involved in this scenario run the very serious risk of losing sight of reality or of being unable to see it without filtering it through their subjective perceptions. Unfortunately, after a rather long period in which China's growth was seen with favor by both Europe and the USA, the perception of the country's progressive affirmation has changed, and this has resulted in a different climate characterized by elements of suspicion, if not fear. One factor that has contributed to bringing about this change has been the launch of China's One Belt, One Road initiative. While its numerous benefits were clear from the beginning, in several places the initiative has been interpreted as a strategy to gradually bring the whole of Euro-Asia under Chinese control. The first and strongest reactions to this interpretation came from the United States, still strongly attached to a foreign policy characterized by the words America first, and whose reactions at least partially reflect those of its increasingly alarmed public opinion. European reactions have not been as severe, although China's growing involvement in the finances of some smaller European states has raised the issue and some concerns of whether those may in the future be decided independently in those cases where Europe and China's interests are in contrast. On the military level, Europe and the US have both followed with attention the Chinese naval exercises in the Mediterranean. This attention was coupled with unease, as not only were these maneuvers performed close to NATO countries, but were also joint bilateral exercises with Russia, an international actor traditionally viewed with distrust by the West. China has also started acquiring a military presence in Djibouti, a location which offers the opportunity of controlling the southern access to the Suez Canal, which remains a vital resource for European commercial traffic. It is, of course, just as important for Chinese commercial interests. The presence in Djibouti is actually just one of the examples of the growing Chinese presence in Africa, a presence that has seriously affected the influence that the major European countries still had in the continent. All of these factors together can explain why in the West, the US view of China, according to which the country was merely a competitor to oppose, is gradually prevailing over the traditional European one, which instead saw the Eastern power as a competitor and partner in equal measure. This means that in NATO, the opposition and contrast viewpoint will most likely prevail over the one preferring dialogue. However, today the latter still has a role and is still valued, and this finds confirmation in an important study which has been prepared by a multi-nation group of 10 experts following a request by the NATO Secretary General. The position of the European Union is more moderated, but in case the situation between the US and China should worsen, Washington is quite likely to ask the European Union for a clear choice of sides. Faced with the terms with me or against me, In the absence of an established foreign policy and lacking the instruments necessary to autonomously protect its security, Europe will probably once again have to follow the American lead. This means that now it is the time to act. Now that not only the positions of these three actors, but also their understanding of each other is still malleable and may be changed. Such a task is by no means easy. While it is true that all three try to decide their course of action on the basis of the real, concrete elements, it is also true that China, the US, and the EU are not only driven by different needs, considerations, and policies, but are also subject to the influence of different internal and external social forces, as well as by the need to take into account the short-term reactions of their public opinion. As it may, the restoration of harmonious relations between these three powers is nowadays not only desirable, but rather, I would say, absolutely necessary. In the 21st century, we, as citizens of the world, are presented with problems that are global in scale: climate change, pollution, overpopulation, economic inequality, and cyber control are just a few of the ones we are more aware of. Such challenges cannot, by their nature, be effectively met by single states or even by single world powers, but need to be faced on a global level. And this can only be possible if these three actors manage to maintain an open communication and create a climate of trust which can make cooperation possible. Thank you very much.
Well, this was a speech of General Giuseppe Cucchi, and I would like to thank Vice President Hu Chenyue, Ambassador Luca Ferrari, Professor Chen Dongxia. Once again, also many thanks to Dr. Pascal Boniface in Paris. And of course, I will inform Giuseppe Cucchi on the results of today's meeting. Now, it is my great honor and pleasure to give the floor to the moderator of the second panel discussion, focusing on the new economic landscape. And I would like to thank you, Director Yu Yunquan, for your wonderful work leading the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies, the think tank which is the main force behind today's conversation. And I know that we will go on the conversation at the end of June and end of August. So thank you very much, Mr. Director, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Gosset, for your warm introduction. You started this session for us, and I believe your moderation of the first session was also successful and productive. Now, coming to the second session, under new geopolitical landscape, we are going to hear from 5 important speakers, and I will introduce each before they speak. What I'd like to remind our speakers is please limit your presentation to 7 minutes. This new political landscape is our topic. I believe we already discussed the new geopolitical landscape, and we will be able to have more common views on new economic landscape. Our first speaker is Mr. Braglot. Please.
So, glad to be here with so many Chinese and European friends. I would like to address 3 points. The meaning of the expression systemic rivalry, Europe as an independent player, and China and TPP. Can you hear me well? Very good. No. My friend, Mr. Quan, referred to the expression systemic rivalry. The European strategy on China of 2019 characterizes China as a cooperative partner, a competitor in the economy and technology, and a systemic rival. Very often, only this last expression is remembered. Systemic rival and cooperation, competition are forgotten. What is the meaning of the expression systemic rival? Margherita Mogherini, the High Representative who signed the strategy, gave what we have to consider the legitimate interpretation of this strategy in the article she wrote in China and the World, edited by our friend David Gosset. And Mrs. Mogherini says, disagreement has not to lead to confrontation. Cooperation and competition prevail over confrontation. We refuse with me or against me approach. This we refuse. China can be a competitor or a rival, but never an enemy. And we have to solve the differences we have with China on a negotiating table, not through unilateral sanctions. So the conclusion is that the real meaning of the expression systemic rivalry is that Europe is in favor of a policy of engagement and peaceful coexistence between different political and economic systems. My second point refers to the Europe as an independent player, complementing with what Professor Boniface has said just a few minutes ago. President von der Leyen said it is impossible to forge the world of tomorrow without close cooperation between the European Union and China. And the High Representative Josep Borrell said Europe does not want to be entrenched in the competition between the US and China, and we refuse economic decoupling. Just a few weeks ago, Mrs. Merkel, the German Chancellor, said, the grouping of countries around China or the US, the formation of blocs, does not coincide with my idea of how the world should be. And President Macron of France said, joining together against China would create the greatest possible risk of conflict. So these few quotes show that Europe has the will to be an independent player in the international order. My last point is China and TPP. Very recently, President Xi Jinping said that China is considering the possibility of joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Let me make a little reflection about Spain joining the European Economic Community, so-called at the time in 1996. At the time, the Spanish economy had big problems, mostly lack of competitiveness. Joining the European Economic Community forced the Spanish enterprises and the Spanish administration simply to get their act together and to become more competitive. And the result was very, very positive for Spain. I was in Beijing when China joined the WTO in December 2001. Prime Minister Surongji also used joining the WTO as a lever to try to make the Chinese economy to become more competitive. China reduced very much its tariffs. The enterprises which could not compete with foreign enterprises simply disappeared, but those who could compete first did so in the Chinese market and then in the international market with the enormous success we know. Now, joining the TPP, if this actually happens, I believe that would be a very important thing for China and the world. First, Europe has a number of economic grievances with China. Some of them have been solved with the signing of the inclusive investment agreement at the end of last year, but some of them have not yet been solved. So if China accepted the discipline of TPP, some of these remaining differences would be solved. On the other hand, joining TPP would inject new momentum in the Chinese economy and could bring about, I believe, positive changes similar to those created by joining WTO. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bricolat. You have participated in our programs many times. Every time you have offered constructive and thought-provoking remarks, and he has come up with a very professional issue in his intervention on economic cooperation, whether China should accede to TPP or not. Next, we are going to invite an expert on this field. Let me invite Ms. Chen Wenling, Chief Economist of China Center for International Economic Exchanges. Please, thank you. Thank you for your invitation. I've listened attentively to all your interventions, all of which are so inspiring and productive. Today, I want to talk about a trilateral economic interaction involving China, US, and EU. On the 8th of April, President Biden made his first official statement or speech since inauguration. At his speech, he said that US has set sail again to resume global leadership. Yeah, it's indeed ambitious, but in his speech, he also mentioned that all investments in the US would observe only one principle, which is Buy America. And he also said that US will concentrate all the investments on purchasing made in US goods, creating US jobs. Well, after reading his speech, on the one hand, I would like to congratulate them on the vaccination program and heightened attention paid to the COVID-19 issue. But on the other hand, I cannot help feeling worried. So far, the political legacy of Trump administration has been very well inherited by President Biden. President Biden has continued Buy America slogan invented by Trump with some expansions using all use investments to purchase made in US products, which is an expansion on the original statement of Trump. So then what about the triangle economic relationship of our three parties? Will Biden's vision be achieved like Trump's? No, that's impossible. According to President Trump, when asked by leaders from other countries, they said to Biden, "Welcome back, but for how long? For how long?" That's a very good question. If the US is not seeking and expanding cooperation on multiple fronts, if the US is not seeking to expand common ground of values and interest, instead, if the US continues to pursue protectionism and unilateralism to enter into exclusive blocs based on what they call democratic values, what's the meaning of a US returning to the international community? Is it sustainable or not? No. Take Buy America, for example. President Trump fought a trade war for 4 years without addressing the trade deficit, without stopping buying from China. Back in 2020, the bilateral trade between China and US increased by 8.3% between China and EU. Trade grew by 5.3%. In Q1 this year, China-US trade grew by 61.3%, a massive growth rate. So if you only buy America, now what about American consumers and markets? Do they agree with Buy America only? Are we promoting the sales of our products to the US? That's not the case. Since the end of the Second World War, US manufacturing used to account for 70% of US GDP. Now manufacturing sector only accounts for 11% of US GDP. The domestic market, only 40% of the market demand in the US can be satisfied by made in America products. At the most, 60% needs to be imported from elsewhere. And the biggest source of imports is China. If you sever ties with China by insisting on Buy America only, can you sever the global supply chain, value chain, and service chain? And I've also taken note that President Biden has talked about 4 measures to rebuild the supply chain in the US, including semiconductor, rare earth, pharmaceutical products, and power batteries. But can US alone do that? Or US and EU alone? No. For semiconductor industry, if you take a look at the entire value chain, 2/3 of the value chain or industrial chain are located in China. If you start from scratch and reinvent the wheel, yes, you have 5 nanometer and 7 nanometer chips, but you don't have chips from other process technologies. And it's going to be hugely costly if you want to rebuild everything starting from scratch. For pharmaceutical products, for another example, for chemical pharmaceutical products, 90% of the innovative drugs come from the US. But the 90% of the APIs for antibiotics come from China. Yes, instead you can use India to replace China, but now the US is reluctant to sell vaccine APIs to India. And the genetic industry in India is thriving, but 70% of the APIs for generics in India are imported from China. So if US wants to rebuild the value chain for the pharmaceutical industry, now what about the raw materials or the APIs? How could you rebuild your value chain without the pharmaceutical ingredients to start with? So personally speaking, they have talked about cooperation, competition, and rivalry. But in cooperation, they are not doing a good job. It's far from enough. Only on climate change, there's a joint China-US statement. But for many other official statements from the administration, from the Congress, including the report on the strategy of the US in the 21st century, competition outweighs cooperation, and rivalry outweighs competition. But we should not lose sight that the cost of confrontation is greater than that of competition, and the cost of competition is greater than that of cooperation. Between China and US, and among China, US, and EU, it is the great triangle we're talking about. For this great triangle, it is the most important. Those three posts are the most important in the world. The three posts should be working in a balanced way to push for inclusive, shared, and sustainable development of the world, instead of disrupting this development paradigm.
One should not go unilateralist or create small circles, small groups. As we are faced with a public health crisis, environmental crisis, and economic crisis, we are faced with common challenges and issues. One well-performing country does not make all countries perform well. Only when all countries perform well can we have a good world. For the United States and China as the top two economies, and Europe as an important region in the world, if the three of us cannot stand behind multilateralism, then there will be no hope for the world. President Biden said yesterday in his speech that no country can face all the crises in this era alone. I believe he's right, but currently the United States is doing just that. The United States does not value China's role, respect China's presence. China today is not China 70 years ago. 70 years ago, China was an impoverished country. It was war-torn, just like Syria and Venezuela and Iraq today. But 70 years later, China is the second largest economy, the largest trading nation. Our manufacturing capacity is 30% of the world's total. Since 2008, China has been the largest contributor to global growth. Our contribution to world economic growth has averaged 30%. We have lifted all people in this country out of poverty. China's manufacturing sector is the largest. We have the largest market, the largest population, the best infrastructure in terms of its completeness. All the other players in the world should see China for what China really is. We still lag behind in certain areas, but you started earlier than us, especially in the third waves of industrialization. China didn't catch up, but now China is catching up. China is making fast progress, and you recognize this. China is a country with 1.4 billion people. If China can become rich and developed, isn't that a good thing for the world? Isn't this country not worth your respect? Isn't this country worth cooperation? Should you push this country back to poverty? We wouldn't say yes to that. And people in the world wouldn't say yes to that. People of vision in Europe and the United States would not say yes. We can see the serious issue of refugees, the damage done to the world by poverty, by environmental degradation. The world calls for cooperation and multilateralism. On January 25th, President Xi spoke at the Davos World Economic Forum. He said something very well. He said, the essence of multilateralism is for world affairs to be determined by all the countries through discussion, and we take the destiny in our own hands. A split world cannot tackle the common challenges. Confrontation will lead humanity to a dead end. So I think China has a more developed economy. Its people are living better lives. And we also have the moral high ground at the beginning of the 21st century with our call for a community of shared future. I believe the kind of multilateralism President Xi spoke of should be the goal of all countries in the world. Thank you. Thank you to Ms. Chen. You spoke of the importance of strengthening economic cooperation. Now, let's turn to former Undersecretary for International Trade, Joan McEntee. Because of the time difference, she sent in a short video. Please watch.
Here and to be asked to join and make a presentation in this wonderful and very, very important project. Whether or not critics of global integration have realized it, the bell of worldwide cooperation, integration, independence among countries has rung. It is impossible to unring that bell. And now it is up to all of us, bell ringers, to figure out a way to collaborate so that the bell towers continue to play music for the future. The relationship between the US and China continues to be one of the most important of the entire 21st century. After 35 years of engagement, the United States and China created a relationship that was competitive, but not overly antagonistic. However, over the past several years, this relationship has begun to evolve in fissures caused by economic, political, and social constraints, unfair treatment of foreign companies, intellectual property, human rights violations, and export manipulation clouded the US prior consideration of China as an economic ally. Similarly, the Chinese have condemned the US for creating barriers to Chinese investments, interference in Chinese foreign policy, and increasing prohibitive export controls and dual use, especially on technology. It is undeniable that the relationship between China and the United States is a complex, multidimensional, dynamic relationship. This relationship is far from ending. In fact, there are other positive indications that consumer goods, for example, in the financial sector, will continue to expand. The US has invested over $1 trillion in the 270 Chinese firms listed in the US, and there continues to be the large interest by Wall Street in Chinese investment. Likewise, China has large investments in the US in the areas of venture capital, pensions, high-tech banking, investment banking, and others. Even with the slowdown of the COVID pandemic and the failure of the imposition of tariffs, which actually created political unrest and anti-globalism, business between the two countries has indeed continued. Additionally, another positive sign of economic cooperation is the recent announcement from the Chinese leadership that US companies' participation in China's modernization process and reform is very welcome. I would now like to offer several long and short-term suggestions for cooperation targeted to encourage growth as well as reform between these countries. In the short term, the first one should be to abolish tariffs. Current tariff rates are at approximately level of 20%. If there is no action taken by either side, there's a possibility that these levels will become permanent. Statistics show that reducing the tariff level in half increases thousands of jobs and trade, and the lack of action on reduction of tariffs will destroy the US-China trade relationship forever, continue to hurt unemployment, impoverish many, and indicate a permanent handicap for business on both sides. The second one is to complete and implement the phase 1 tariff agreement of last year and concurrently begin phase 2 of the US-China agreement. The Chinese have stated publicly that they agreed to phase 1 and all of its commitments, and it should be monitored and enforced by everyone. It is acknowledged that this will be a difficult undertaking since the remaining issues include state-owned enterprises, technology, cybersecurity, and industrial policy matters. Nonetheless, there must be an agreement to a date for finalization of this agreement, such as perhaps the APEC meeting in October, as both heads of the US and China will be present. This could also be a time to begin some incremental progress on the stage 2 agreement. The third area is the removal of travel restrictions between both countries. Travel and tourism is a critical industry of over $30 billion, as well as a serious cultural exchange program for both countries. Both should immediately agree to remove many of the current visa restrictions, such as the US restrictions on CCP members and Chinese travel restrictions on US policymakers, as well as business people. The fourth is the removal of academic restrictions between US and China. Countries should be welcoming students who are not involved in military research. Countries need to develop programs to ensure and implement stricter guidelines, preserving academic freedom while tightening up appropriate security procedures and policies where necessary. Sixth one is to remove inapplicable investment restrictions. Both countries need to remove restrictive regulatory regimes which are counterproductive in regulating investments. There should be a strategic examination of barriers to foreign investment and transparent policy encouraging such interests. Now for the longer term and more complicated recommendations. The first should be that US and China must begin a dialogue about the joining of the CPTPP. Chinese leadership has indicated they are desirous of joining, and the US has indicated studying this decision, but there's no final commitment. The failure of either country to join this agreement will seriously damage the ability for collaboration with each other in this critical world market. Economic cooperation is a driver of global well-being. It is a driver of growth. It is a driver of a way that people can improve and better their lives. And collaboration is essential in this time of difficulties among countries. As the world becomes more complex, economic issues can lead to divisiveness or positivity. We must remember that this is a crucial time and that all efforts should be made to make sure that there is possible and productive cooperation and collaboration in order to ensure the safety and future of all of our countries. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I hope next time it will be in person.
好，感谢。
Thank you, Ms. McEntee, for your remarks. You spoke of short-term and long-term recommendations to improve economic and trade ties between our two countries. Very informative. Ambassador Bragolat also spoke of TPP and the Chinese government's attitude. Next, our speaker is an expert on economic and trade issues, former Director General from the Development Research Center of the State Council, Mr. Zhao Jinping. I read one of his articles last month, and he had very good recommendations on China's position on TPP. Mr. Zhao, please. Could you please switch on audio? We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
I'd like to thank the host for inviting me to address this roundtable. If I take a look at the lineup of the Chinese participants, they come not only from Beijing and Shanghai, but also from Nanning of Guangxi province, where I am now. Nanning is the provincial capital in China closest to ASEAN. Today, I want to talk about a China-EU investment agreement and the potential China-US agreement. They could serve as an important bond to deepen our relations. Within the framework of institutional cooperation, the city of Nanning and the province of Guangxi have benefited tremendously from China-ASEAN cooperation. It has gone a long way in promoting regional economic development. But more importantly, I want to emphasize that an improved bilateral relationship will definitely find its influence in multilateral relations. In the case of Nanning and Guangxi province, within the signing of the FTA between China and ASEAN has made the Guangxi province more open, making it able to step up international cooperation with many countries and economies around the world. Although I'm talking about China-EU investment agreement and China-US agreement, playing the role of an important bridge to deepen bilateral relations. But to some extent, the bilateral relations have served as the foundation for multilateral ties between China and EU and China and the US. And among China, US, and the EU, we are the three most important economies in the world. And any pair of bilateral relations is having an important impact on the direction of multilateral relations as well. That's why I've chosen this topic. As we know, On the 30th of December 2020, there was a summit between China and the EU leaders, jointly announcing to the outside world that negotiations were concluded, leading to the signing of the CAI, and we have entered subsequent legal and legislative procedures, respectively. That agreement would have a major impact on regional and global economic development. Between China and the EU, if we put our GDP together, it reaches $30 trillion, accounting for 34% of global economy. With CAI between China and the EU, binding the two economies together, it will have a far-reaching significance for global economy. Over the recent years, globally speaking, due to unilateralism and trade protectionism, globalization is slowing down. And with profound changes in global economics, given such circumstances, how do we press ahead with economic globalization? It's all the more important than before. Between China and the EU, the signing of this important agreement is meaningful in the following way. First, it's open. It helps push forward multilateral investment and trade. Therefore, it will have a positive spillover effect. In this connection, the CAI between China and the EU will help push forward economic globalization with a major contribution. That's an assessment that we must give to this agreement. For this agreement, it will play an important part in regional and multilateral economic cooperation. Moreover, as it observes an open regionalism and bilateralism, it will help push forward regional cooperation and economic globalization with far-reaching implications. So our bilateral cooperation as such is global in nature. It is commensurate with the size of our respective economies in the global economy. More importantly, for China and EU to get together, strengthened cooperation will not only deliver benefits to both economies, but also provide a boost to global economic stability and economic globalization. That's the first point I want to make, focusing on the deepening of a China-EU relationship with the investment agreement while having its role to play in multilateralism as well. Secondly, between China and the EU, our trade volume is quite big, but in contrast, our bilateral investment accounts for a much smaller share in contrast to our trade volume and the size of GDP. For example, from 2001 to 2019, the cumulative EU to China investments amounted to $110 billion, and 94 billion from China to EU. So in our respective FDI attraction, it only accounts for between 4% and 5% of FDI attraction. That appears too small given the size of our economy and the trade interactions. So the signing of the agreement will help strengthen bilateral investment between the two economies, delivering opportunities to Chinese companies and all the more importantly to European companies. Why do I say it is delivering more opportunities to European companies? It's based on the following. First, with the announced text of CAI, China has made important pledges in market-driven reform, for example, on SOE reform and the transparency of industrial subsidies, as well as other reform issues. China and EU have reached consensus. After the agreement takes effect, the market-driven reform in China will be notably accelerated. And that accelerated reform will benefit not only companies of both China and EU, but also push forward reforms in China itself. And those reforms have been repeated subject matters between China and the EU discussions. The EU has kept saying that there's still a gap between what they want and what China has done. But with this agreement, there is another big step forward, which means companies from the EU, thanks to accelerated market-driven reforms in China, will have a greater opportunity participating in market-based competition in China. Second, with this investment agreement, China has notably improved access by EU companies to Chinese market. For key industry sectors, a lot more opportunities have been provided. For example, the automotive sector is one where EU enjoys a competitive edge. In the automotive sector, the access to investment by EU will be further expanded, especially in NEV, new energy vehicles. There's a tremendous demand going forward in China about NEV, and also for a financial service industry. We could read from the text of the agreement that EU-based financial institutions will have greater and improved access to China's FSI market, in contrast to or building on the existing multilateral agreements of openness, so that the EU financial institutions could play a bigger part in the reform and openness of China's financial service market. And also we can read from the text that for private education service providers, there is a further relaxation of the equity holding thresholds by European investors, and more education service providers could enter the Chinese market, investing in education entities registered in China with a higher equity stake. So those sectors used to be, the openness in those sectors used to be a key demand from EU. That's being satisfied in this agreement. It will deliver a lot of opportunities and benefits to EU companies. In turn, for Chinese companies, they will benefit. They are beneficiaries as well. For example, improving openness and business climate will benefit them, and the EU market will become more open to Chinese companies. It will help Chinese companies strengthen their investments in Europe. So talking about mutual benefits, this agreement has provided bright prospects going forward. Thirdly, we could see that in the China-EU agreement, in many important areas have been covered. So for investment facilitation and liberalization, that agreement has been most progressive and high level so far. So the China and EU economic interests will be integrated through investment arrangements. It will help deepen our economic. So from this point of view, we should look at how the CAI will push forward our bilateral ties as well as our domestic reform, while delivering tremendous business opportunities to companies of both sides. And then there's a question mark. As it is mutually beneficial, why are there some uncertainties in its progress? Maybe it's still hinges on a variety of geopolitical factors, such as politicization of economic issues. It is preventing agreements that will be truly beneficial to both sides from making further progress towards final ratification. Both China and the EU should review its importance to both of us by expediting its process while overcoming disruptions and obstacles. It is all the more important for us to accelerate the process to make it effective as soon as possible. On the part of the EU, they are still reeling from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And with this agreement, we can help stabilize our economies and the global economy as well. That's what I want to talk about on China-EU. Talking about China-US investment agreement, I think, you know, when China and EU started the BIT negotiation, China-US BIT negotiations were starting from 2013. China and the US readjusted our investment focus on pre-access national treatment plus negative list as the basis for BIT negotiation. So far, China had never adopted the pre-access national treatment plus negative list to serve as a basis for economic relationship with other countries. But by then, in Shanghai, with the free trade zone, we had some pilot and experiment. And now in China, it has become an extensive policy for investment policy. Thanks to negotiations on some major BITs, it has helped China speed up in reform domestically with far-reaching influence.
In fact, between 2013 and 2016, China and the United States had negotiations on BIT, and with much progress achieved. There was the talk in China that when we negotiated this agreement, we were facing the United States with highly liberal markets. But back then, China was under a lot of pressure. So some people believed that if the BIT could be successfully reached after negotiation and go into effect, its impact on China would be at least as positive as China's accession to the WTO. People like me felt the same, but starting in 2017, because of the change of governments, this process that had already produced major progress came to a halt. It didn't go through, despite the significant progress. But today, things have changed. There is a new government which has proposed the renewal of cooperation with China and other long-term goals, but to really address the differences between China and the United States and find new convergence of interest, it would be a good option for us to restart BIT negotiation. This will be an opportunity for us to close our differences and also bring our openness and interaction to a higher level. This will also contribute to a relationship that is put back on the right track. So I believe it is high time that we restarted such negotiations with the United States. When I listened to Ms. McEntee, she spoke of the need for China to join the CTPPT, especially at a time when the United States has not made its decision. Probably we need to wait a little longer, during which we can make good preparations. But looking at the BIT, we've already had experience from past negotiations. There's already progress. So if we can restart the negotiation and to address issues that are left unresolved, I believe this will be a positive development and have a positive impact on not only China-US relations, but also on the world. So this is what I discussed today, how to use BIT as a bond for global cooperation. These are my personal views, and thank you for listening. Thank you, Mr. Zhao, for your very detailed analysis from a professional point of view. Our last speaker is former Bulgarian Deputy Prime Minister, Ms. Bobeva. Please.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being the last speaker is a challenge because we have many other things to do, but I'll try to cut my time as much as possible. I would like to thank to Mr. Gosset for inviting me and giving me the chance to choose the topic for my participation today. I'm new in your club, in your beautiful team of visionaries about the cooperation between the three superpowers in the economic markets. And I choose the topic of FDI because to me, foreign direct investment, the cross-border investment is the test of multilateralism. And as my previous speaker, our colleague mentioned, that's the core of negotiations and agreements. But before being subject of negotiations and agreements, FDI should be very well understood. So that's why I prepared the presentation. I'll try to share now. Please tell me if you could see my presentation. I think it's beautiful. And you could see now why it is beautiful. So the background is silk. And why silk? Not only because the what communicates economies of Europe and Asia for a long historical period of time is silk, but because the cooperation between Europe and China is beautiful, but in the same time as the silk is very tiny and very hard to produce. So we need a lot of work to do, and as the previous speakers pointed out, there is a long agenda in order to bring the cooperation and multilateralism back in a way that everybody will benefit from this multilateralism. So I start with my silk presentation. I did recent research on the reasons why we have so many prejudice about Chinese investments abroad, but also prejudice and wrong understanding about the Chinese foreign investment in China also. So 5 questions, many answers. Why Chinese outward investment became problem for some of the countries? Is FDI conventional theory sufficient to explain Chinese FDI? What makes Chinese investment abroad very specific? Who benefits from Chinese investment, and what is the prospect, and how we could build up this very important fundament of multilateralism? So first question, why Chinese outward investment became a concern for some countries? Do you hear me? Is everything okay with the presentation and my voice?
Very good, very good.
Great. So first, we have a little bit of exaggeration of Chinese FDI size and impact. We have prevailing SOEs, state-owned enterprises, in the overseas outflow investment from China. We have Chinese investment very much digitally advancement, which creates some troubles. And also some of the largest Chinese investors abroad are focused on sensitive for national security reasons. We have also a little bit of a small share, as my colleague, previous speaker mentioned, not so big Chinese investment of EU and USA in the Chinese economy. So this creates non-comfortable position as regards the reciprocity and how much China and US and EU are equal in terms of opening for foreign direct investments. Does the conventional theory sufficient to explain Chinese foreign direct investment? I'm not going to put you down in the big theoretical discussion, but we came to similar position as the one when Japanese investment started penetrating Europe and US. There was a lot of conservatism, a lot of prejudice about Japanese investments abroad. Similar of that sort we see it now. So the eclectical theory of Dunning very much fits to the Chinese investment, but still there are a lot of open questions as about the theory. Now, what makes the Chinese investment abroad specific? And they're really specific, and the conventional theory is hard to explain them. So first we have China growing to a global player in the FDI market from $4.9 billion in 2000 to 97 billion in 2019. Actually, 2018 was the largest FDI from China. So if we compare the inflow outflow and also FDI outflow from GDP, we could observe that growing FDI from China, but still below the potential of Chinese economy. So what we could expect is really further growth of Chinese investment abroad. But still, we have a very small part of the investments in China from US, which is 15%, and only 20% from the EU in 2019. Chinese FDI outflow is only 0.68 from the GDP of China, while in the case of EU, this is 12% and 20% for US. Whatever we speak about, but China remains a net importer of FDI. A lot of research was pointed to the difficulties in penetrating Chinese market, but the figures suppose something different. So China exports FDI less than it imports from the rest of the world. Also, EU investment in China are only 11.2 billion, which makes some uneasy position in EU economies. Only 11% of the Chinese FDI are in the IT sector. Again, it is exaggerated that, but the bulk of Chinese investment abroad is that one. As regards the composition, geographical composition, again, a lot of prejudice. 55% of Chinese investment in China and out of China come through Hong Kong. We have, though, very fragmented structure of Chinese investments. We have very huge overseas multinational kind of exposure from China abroad. And in the same time, we have small companies. And most of the research is based on the big one, and they ignore the very important value that the small and medium-sized Chinese businesses creates abroad. The state-owned enterprises are really more internationalized in China than the small and medium-sized enterprises. But the major concern for those who criticize Chinese policy as regards FDI is that Chinese investments abroad seem more manageable, and also those inward investments. Who benefits from Chinese FDI? There are a lot of controversial studies on this, but the impact depends very much on the sectors. And prevailing position is that the industrial investments from China are rather positive. What is the problem? Let me finish the prospects for Chinese FDI. The major question is how to unlock the potential, because as we see, there is a large potential to have both Chinese investments abroad and European or American or other countries' investment in China. The first one is reducing the administrative burden. and all the obstacles which are created to both sides of investments. China plays an important role in the post-COVID economic recovery. Look at the first quarter of GDP of China, 18.3% growth as compared to last year. We cannot resume the global FDI flows without Chinese investment, and Chinese investment will bring us further to the recovery of the world economy and the economies of both US and the EU. But we need to change the perceptions. We need to converge the theories. Look at the definition, the Chinese definition of FDI and the European one, totally different. Look at the statistical data, totally different. So we need to do more to learn between ourselves, to better understand each other and make multilateralism work, and let the figures speak about what is the result. Thank you very much.
好，感谢多贝娃女士。
Thank you, Ms. Bobova. You showed us very well-made PPT, and your remarks were also very well received. Again, I'd like to thank all the 5 speakers for their contributions. And for the closing ceremony, I'd like to invite the 2 Mr. Gaos. First, Mr. Gosset. Professor Yu, thank you for calling us to Mr. Gaos. It's very interesting.
Professor Yu and I will be because we have been talking for more than 2 hours and a half. So I will be very short. But Professor Yu, I would like to thank you and to thank your think tank, the Academy of Contemporary China and World Studies. Because without you, of course, we would not have had this conversation. Again, I want to thank the French think tank IRIS, the Bulgarian Diplomatic Institute, and it's so good, Madame Bobeva, to have you with us today. And I share what Professor Yu Unxuan said about the beauty of your presentation, Silk. It's very deep as a metaphor, and metaphors are always very useful. Many thanks to Ambassador Bregolat and to the Italian ambassador. I think a key idea, Professor Yu, is the idea of strategic trust. We need to make everything we can to build this strategic trust. And I fully agree with what Mr. Solana said about the dangers of decoupling. So facing these dangers, what we do is that we renew the dialogue, we deepen the dialogue. I would like to share also with you, dear colleagues and friends, that we just took the initiative of building a EU-China-US global initiative platform, and today you had Joan McEntee from the US and Eugenio Bregolat, who are 2 very strong supporters of this platform in order for the 3 parts to deepen mutual understanding and to find ways to cooperate at this very complex moment. Professor Yu Unxuan, your think tank will go on to push for more conversation, dialogue, and cooperation. I want to mention again the importance of your event at the end of June on technology. That's going to be very, very, very stimulating. And at the end of August, we will have a conversation on the notion of governance and global governance. For example, what Javier Solana said about the necessity to reform the WTO is something very important. Professor Yu, I want also to thank you, colleagues and staff. They have been doing a wonderful job. And I want also to thank the interpreters, because without them, we would not be able to operate as we are doing. Thank you, Madame Bobeva, for your understanding on that. And now for me, it is the time to thank Dr. Gao Anming, a wonderful leader, and you will have the very difficult task to really make the conclusion. I was a non-conclusive conclusion, but I give you the floor, Dr. Gao, for you to conclude. But thank you very much to you and to the China International Publishing Group. Thank you very much. 谢谢大家。
感谢高大伟。
Thank you, David Gosset. You have done my job. Now let me invite Mr. Gao Anming to say a few concluding remarks.
For your very short but very thought-provoking remarks. And actually, I share very much with you in summing up some of the key points from our speakers. And as you said, we are actually, we scheduled our meeting for 2 hours, but it's 45 minutes more. And I'll also keep my remarks very short. 我想经过我们2多小时的
After 2+ hours of heated discussions, we have reached a lot of consensus. As David has pointed out, let me extend my thanks to all of the participants. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, we have to host it online. However, even in the online format, it does not reduce the depth and the width of our discussions. Well, despite the fact that it is a short meeting, it has been very effective, focusing on the tenets of multilateralism and the China-EU-US cooperation. We have talked about the role of multilateralism in the new economic landscape in the world, with candid and in-depth discussions, ending up with a lot of thought-provoking ideas. And although all of us do agree that we're confronted with multiple challenges and difficulties, and despite all those, we have come up with a lot of operational and workable and practical ideas and suggestions. We have fully reaffirmed the importance of multilateralism in addressing global issues, as well as the importance of China, US, and EU collaboration. All of us agree that multilateralism is an important pathway towards global peace and development. And in the world today, we need multilateralism and cooperation all the more and more than ever. And we all believe that multilateralism should be inclusive instead of focusing on one's own standpoint or one's own circle. It is suggested that all three parties should step up dialogue and mutual learning so as to forge consensus and synergy, so as to contribute to peace and development around the world.
The analysis of Madame Bobeva, your analysis is just as beautiful as the silk. I was really enlightened. 所有这些观点呢
All these viewpoints have paved the way for us to expand our cooperation in order to practice and implement multilateralism with a clear direction ahead of us. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for your viewpoints. Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Gao's. Well, let me re-emphasize an important point that David has covered. In collaboration, we're going to host another 2 other important fora. I would invite your participation by then. And once again, our thanks go to the interpreters and my staff and team, as well as our partners from EU-China Forum. I'll see you next time. Thank you.
再见。
Bye.